Welcome to our latest MQ Open Mind podcast. I'm absolutely delighted. Craig and I are delighted. We've got another fantastic guest. We've got James Downs, and James is well known to all of us in the MQ family. He's been an ambassador for a few years now. And so, James, maybe as an opener, really, well, welcome, first of all.
Hi. Thanks for welcome in.
And so, as an opener, can you tell us a bit about how you got involved in MQ and sort of more your own mental health journey?
Yeah, I think how I got involved is a bit easier because mental health journeys can be quite long and complicated, although perhaps they shouldn't have to be. And that, I suppose, is why I got involved with MQ, because I think that there is a different story that we can tell about mental health, and what we know about mental health is still growing. I think it's still in its infancy, really. And I think that there are so many charities out there, and I've done a lot of charity work, and I really passionately believe in a lot of the work that charities do. But I think MQ stood out to me as an organization to get involved with because it was something slightly different. Many of the charities I've worked with, they provide frontline services. And I think that's kind of once things have got to a bad place, and those things are really essential. You know, people are where they are, they need helping. But I think MQ offers that sort of alternative, bigger vision of what these people's trajectories could be. And perhaps we could prevent people from getting to that point that they need that level of support. So I think it was refreshing to have an organization that had a different take on mental health. And ultimately, I think sort of building our knowledge and helping to create and shape our knowledge of mental health and what works for who is something that I want to be part of. I want to be part of that conversation. And I think people's lived experiences have to be part of that conversation too.
No, I couldn't have put it better, I suppose, the role that, or the gap that MQ was trying to fill when it was established. Obviously, is it eight or 9 years ago now, I think it is, or certainly around that time. And yeah, because MQ being the only dedicated mental health research charity in the UK. But I suppose that what's really interesting, I think, over the last, say, 8 or 9 years has been that growth in the importance and the centrality of lived experience in everything that we do in research. And I think that's been really, really, really incredible to see. And I think I like your point that we're still in our infancy. And I think you're right, as a mental health science or whatever way you want to describe it, we're definitely still in our infancy. But you have a number of other roles. So do you work with me? You've done a lot of work with, obviously, Royal College of Psychiatrists, I think, and NHS England. Do you want to tell us a bit what you've done in those roles, James?
Yeah, sure. I have a number of different jobs. Sometimes I struggle to keep up with how many there are. But I really like having a bit of a piecemeal approach to my work, because I think partly because of having ADHD, I work really well doing a little bit here, a little bit there, if I can sort of balance it out. And like you said about lived experience, that's changed over the amount of time that I've been doing lived experience work, which is, quite a few years now. And most of these jobs are sort of coming at mental health from that angle. And I think when I first started doing it, it was quite tokenistic. It was being on committees, just not really be expected to say anything. And I would say things and people would be surprised. And now it's much more about actively involving people in a way that's not transactional. And those kind of roles I've built up and hopefully helped to shape how those roles are done, because often still people are surprised when you come to things with skills, rather than just your story. So I do things with NHS England around policy and eating disorders in particular. I work with Royal College psychiatrists across eating disorders and liaison psychiatry. And then a number of different research projects that I'm involved with, usually from that lived experience angle, either sharing my own lived experience and thinking how to apply that to the project. Because like I said, for me, it's not really just about sharing a story. It's about what expertise can be taken from that and applied to a task. And then I help to involve other people as well, because I don't just want to carry on sharing my experience. It's not going to be representative. It's just my experience. So I try and facilitate others to be involved, things like running focus groups and getting qualitative data to help shape how research happens and the kind of questions that we ask as well. So those things, they all sort of sit in that lived experience. But then there's two other things that I do. One is yoga and dance teaching, which I absolutely love, which I see as an embodied approach to mental health. And then I am also doing a doctorate in counselling psychology, which is a really nice fit for me because counselling psychology, maybe we talk about this a little bit more, has an explicit commitment to social justice, which is something that I really believe in, and having voices that we don't normally have heard incorporated into research and psychology and mental health. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot there and so much there. So incredibly busy. So can I just come back to your last point about, so how's the PhD going and what stage are you at in the PhD and what are you doing it on?
Yeah, so it's a professional doctorate. So it's kind of half research and half clinical training. Same as clinical psychology, really, but it's counselling psychology, which not as many people know about. Equivalent, but there is a slightly different sort of perspective. Like I said, social justice and sort of emphasis on relationship, less clinical, I suppose, counselling psychology. And yeah, those two parts for me go really well because I like research. I love research and have a sort of theoretical head, but it has to be sort of connected somehow to practice, and that sort of incorporation of the two, I think, is really important. And sadly, from a lot of work that I do with professionals working in services, they've sort of been sold that they're scientific practitioners, that they're doing their practice and their research, and actually they're just doing practice because the caseloads are so high, etc. So I think that it's sort of really good when you can incorporate those things. I enjoyed it. So I'm at the end of my first year out of 3. It's been really, really enjoyable. I love being a therapist. I'm working with students in university here in Cambridge, mostly a CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy model. Right now it's the middle of exams. So you go into the university building and you feel like your shoulders coming up. It's kind of nice to feel like I can contribute somehow to, maybe not students feeling the best they ever have done during exams, but at least sort of preventing things from getting worse. Yeah. So yeah, that's really interesting.
I think it's great. Best of luck with the next 2 years. That's really exciting. Go back to just something you said about, the role you play in terms of the lived experience stuff. And we're working together with part of this broader group on MQ, Gone Too Soon. And again, I think the role you and others play is just absolutely vital. But it's more than, I think what I think's been really good over the last 10 years or more has been not only having the different voices heard, but heard equally. And I think that's really, really important. I think we are moving in that direction, but we still have a longer journey ahead to ensure that the lived experience voice is as loud as it needs to be or should be. So I think that's so. Personally speaking, a huge thank you for your contribution with the work that we're doing, and I know you'll continue to contribute. And so again, maybe just bring it then. So I was reading an article you wrote, James, or you were interviewed for, I think in the Daily Mirror or the Sunday Mirror. I say mirror, really funny because I'm from Northern Ireland. Did you say mirror or you say something different? Mirror. So there's some different pronunciation in Northern Ireland. But you know the newspaper I'm talking about, certainly. Yeah. And so James, but in that you were talking about, so focus a bit into your journey. That article was just, you were reflecting on the challenges you faced as lockdown kicked in. Do you maybe want to tell us a bit about that and then obviously your relationship with bulimia, I think it was you were discussed in that article.
Yeah, it's a good way in. I'm trying to think which article because especially recently eating disorders are more and more in the media, and I think that's a good thing in a way. But I can't remember what I said to you. The article that you said, and talking about bulimia in lockdown. I think, like many people with a range of mental health problems, I found that I slipped back in the lockdown, partly because the things that I was doing to be as well as possible, I wasn't able to do them anymore. So my foundation in terms of the progress that I had made with my eating disorder and recovery was rooted in relationships with other people, being able to go out and eat out in public, and to not have eating as this sort of secret, private thing that I struggle with alone. And so obviously not being able to have contact with people with the pandemic was really difficult. And I think the thing that it highlighted for me was almost a positive, in that it showed the things that helped by not having realized actually those things do help. And a lot of my journey has been not having anything that really seemed to help. And so I guess that was kind of at least reassuring. And I did have a lot of skills, other skills to fall back on. And I suppose I wanted to share that story because I think we don't hear enough about these stories, especially eating disorders in men, especially eating disorders that aren't anorexia. But I also think that I recognized how privileged I was, I suppose, to have had some treatment in the past that was helpful, and that I did have stuff to fall back on. And I worried about those, and I still worry about those people who perhaps encountered the pandemic and difficulties with food and eating for the first time. And we know that from the data that's coming through now in terms of presentations in even emergency settings of people first time presenting with an eating disorder and they need emergency treatment. Like, I worry about those people who perhaps couldn't get the help they needed at that moment, or hadn't had help before. So it made me reflect on how far I've come in a way. And overall, my eating disorder story started in my teens and was anorexia for a long time, and then bulimia. But it also did remind me of sort of, okay, we can all be susceptible to slipping. What are the protective factors? I'm really interested in those. What does good health look like? I'm really interested in that, because often we only talk about illness. And I was thinking sort of also about how far I still have to go. And I'm very open that I haven't recovered from my eating disorder, that I don't have a mild eating disorder. And I think that is important, again, to be honest about, but sometimes isn't met with most understanding, I guess. And so it's a bit of a risk sometimes, because people struggle to hold this idea that you can struggle with an eating disorder and be a therapist, or you can have living experience, not just lived experience. Often people ask, in the media, the interviews that I've done recently, so how did you recover? What made you recover? I'm kind of like, well, what makes you think that I've recovered just because I appear in this certain way? So sometimes these lived experience stories are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Maybe it's living experience and we don't really know what to do with that because it's not in a box, it's not tidied up and something in the past. But I think if we just have these neat, tidy or conventional stories of mental health, and we don't hear from people who are really in it or in a marginalized situation or in an atypical kind of situation, then we don't expand and sort of push out our conventional ideas. So I know that's a really long answer about lots of different things, but I'm more than happy to talk about some of my experiences with eating disorders as well. But I think that all of these things kind of weave together, don't they? And I'm always interested in, what can I make out of this difficult experience, rather than just it be this terrible thing that I've been through.
No, you've raised so many important points there. One that struck me is, which relates to your last point, but also to the living versus lived experience. And I think that is, that's the living experience is now used more commonly as together with lived experience. I think that is really important, because it recognizes, as you say, that's what is recovery? How do you define recovery? We all have mental health, or people may struggle all their lives with some aspect of their mental health. So I think that is really important, recognizing the present, that this is the present and not necessarily the past. But I'm just curious then, James, on your sense of things I think have improved, right, in terms of the conversations. But you made an interesting observation there about bulimia is not taken as seriously, I think you said, as anorexia. So have you any sense of why that's the case, or what's your reflection on that?
There are lots of reasons. I think it's sort of a perpetuation of the historic sort of stereotype. So if we've always thought eating disorders anorexia, then that's what we're going to continue to think more, and that's going to take a time to shift. I'm starting to write this month a chapter of a book that I'm doing with somebody else about sort of discourses and narratives of mental health and illness and eating disorders, particularly in men. And one thing that I'm starting to do is look back through the history of eating disorders and the evolution of diagnoses and things. And, anorexia has been sort of documented for hundreds of years, if not longer, in different ways, whether or not it's been sort of a medicalized thing. You can think of, the Buddha thousands of years ago starving to the point where apparently you could see the spine through his stomach, and that was for sort of ascetic, spiritual kind of reasons, which are privileged as good. This is getting quite, abstract here. But I think, that could be seen as, well, that was medically anorexia. Whether or not it was anorexia nervosa as a mental health condition is another thing. But bulimia is, become a diagnosis in my lifetime. Of course, we've got much further to go. And we have to remember that. I think we don't remember that. I think we sometimes fall into a trap of thinking this is it. And we have already about mental health, and this, when you have bulimia, it happens to this kind of person, and it involves these kind of experiences, and this kind of treatment is what's going to work. Well, the research on that treatment has been done with people who are not at all like me, who don't have the same experiences, and so it's definitely not a finished project, and it has to be open to change. But historically, it's something that we're much less familiar with, something like bulimia, I think, than anorexia. And then I think also that point that I was trying to make about the behaviors of anorexia are associated with things we privilege and that we hold in high regard, like self-restraint and control. And any celebrity who loses weight will be praised, for it and complimented. And I watched some stand-up comedy recently where the comedian said, like, and I've lost this much weight. And there was the biggest cheer of the whole night for that. And I'm sort of like, why do we celebrate that? What does that say about what we hold here, nice and high? What do we not want to hear about? And what do we denigrate? That with bulimia, it's such a sort of loss of control. It's messy, it's visceral, it's dirty, it's bodily fluids, it's stuff that, it's wasteful, it's shameful. It's invisible. We can easily stay behind closed doors, so we have the choice. Whereas with anorexia, it confronts us in the face of somebody's very unwell and emaciated, and people comment, So there is the option to keep it or push it behind closed doors, or not invite it to come out. And for me, one of the biggest difficulties that I've had that has maintained my illness has been not speaking about it, keeping it behind closed doors, not being open and not having spaces to be open. And I think that giving voice to it and being sort of explicit about it, even if it doesn't always feel comfortable for me or for the listener, is like my new kind of project. Because I think that it's something that, well, at least I'm committed to it, because I think it's just something that people need to know about, because even professionals that I talk to don't necessarily get it. Like, they have an idea of bulimia as a little bit of overeating, like Princess Diana in The Crown, which was, I think, a very inaccurate representation of bulimia. And I think I've said to a professional, like, and obviously I have to spend money on food for bulimia, and that has a big financial impact. And they were like, what do you mean you have to spend money on food? No, where does the food come from to have massive binge eating episodes? And doesn't that have a huge impact, especially with a cost of living crisis? This was a mental health professional. So it's no wonder people in the rest of society don't know about the realities of it. And it's not just the word, it's what kinds of experiences, not in a prescriptive way that everybody's going to have the same ones, but in at least so that we have some kind of actual image or feeling for what that lived experience might be about, rather than keeping it behind closed doors. So I don't even remember what the question was now.
Well, what you managed to do in the last 3 minutes is highlight the importance of the historical, cultural, and social context of all mental health problems, doesn't matter what they are. So
absolutely, yeah.
I'm looking forward to reading that chapter. Have you written? So have you written the chapter yet, or you've just started writing the chapter?
I'm just starting it because we not long signed the contract for this book.
So what's the title of the book? Or can you give us a shout out for the book so we can?
It's coming out like our deadline is December next year. So we've got, and the title might change in between, but it's about discourses of men's mental health. And I did write a blog for Beat about different kind of stigmas for different eating disorders in particular. And so like that's available. And I talked a little bit about the history there as well. But I do think like even, the religious and sort of moralistic ideas about certain things around food, we see that all of the time. Like if I bump into one of my yoga students in the supermarket with my shopping basket and the stuff in there that yoga teachers shouldn't be eating, I hide it because I'm like, judge me. Yeah, because we're so easily sort of ready to judge other people on food and eating. And actually, a lot of research showing that it's not individual choices. It's all about the food environment and environmentally and contextually driven. And I think that we need to detach this sort of personal, individual blame and responsibility on one hand, or blame on the other, about our choices sometimes and our behavioral choices with things like food and exercise and stuff. It's much more complex. It's much more bound by the environment, I think.
And can you think of because what we're touching on really is some of the stigma, but also the stereotypes and the misunderstandings. But so what else can we do, or in terms of trying to challenge that? Now, you've talked about having different voices and diversity and so on, but have you any sort of ideas on what we should be doing better or differently as a mental health community, as the community in general, the media? What else should we be doing, do you think?
I think it's that telling different stories being really important. But I think it also involves being prepared to be uncomfortable, being prepared to do something that might challenge the conventional sort of narrative, and not writing it off as anecdote necessarily, but seeing it as a question of maybe more people experience this kind of thing than we thought. And I think part of it means that some people, including people like me, might have to give up space a little bit or give over space to other people, which is something that I sort of see myself transitioning into more and more, is that I like to facilitate other people's experiences contributing to things rather than it just be me all the time, because it really opens my eyes to the kinds of experiences that people have that are different from mine, but how there might be some, general themes or some universal underpinning like principles. So I think that, it might be for me turning down interviews and saying, have you asked this person who's not told their story as much? But obviously you have to be, careful about that and not putting pressure on people. But it's, if we are going to hear alternative stories and broaden out that image, then the media has to ask different people. Researchers have to ask different people, not just going to the safe pair of hands. I was once asked to do a piece of work. I won't say who it's with, but I was asked and I was told when that person asked me, oh, because you're a safe pair of hands. And I was like, that's great. And it's lovely that that I'll do a good job and that I'll contribute effectively, etc. But isn't that denying an opportunity for somebody else to learn those skills? Because it is very skilled work to apply lived experience in projects. Isn't it also denying yourself an opportunity to hear from other people and to have a broader, more rounded knowledge? Because that's what this is about, co-constructing knowledge from these different perspectives. And so maybe don't ask me, or, I did that piece of work because if I didn't do it at that time, nobody else would have been asked. And I kind of knew that. But I don't hold on to that. I want to sort of disseminate this and sort of build structures where people can contribute. And so that goes across like journalists, researchers, services, when they're seeing people. Who are we not seeing? Even who we know experience these things, who are we not seeing? And it's, written into, say, adult eating disorder services guidelines that they should be, and I know it because I helped write them, but they should be reaching communities. They should have the capacity, which they don't. I'm not blaming the staff. They should have the money to be able to reach out to particularly vulnerable groups. And, that should be their work, not the work of the person suffering who has to come through the door. So we need a lot more of that as well. And thinking all the time, who else could I be involving? Because it's sharing and it's increasing collaboration. Otherwise, people like me will just, get a bit of a career out of it. Great. But we need to be bringing other people in as well.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And I know MQ, part of obviously the MQ ambassador program in some respects is trying to have that diversity of voices out there. And I know in Scotland, we've now, in the work that we do in suicide prevention, so we've lived experience panel now, which are directly feeding into government, and they're central. But one of the guiding principles is, again, just to address that point you're making, James, of ensuring all these, well, I hate the term hard to reach, because that's a terrible, it just means a term, because it means we've just failed to reach these people, is get those voices that we don't always hear or often hear from. We're really keen to do that in Scotland, and there's other examples. So I think that's when I think one of the biggest achievements in mental health science I'd say we've made over the last 10 years is putting some of those structures in place. But you also made a point earlier about, and that's so true, is that if we're asking people with lived experience to tell their stories, what are the supports out there? Who's there at the end after the call saying, are you okay, or whatever? And one of the things we try and do in these podcasts actually is check in with all of our guests just to make sure that everybody is okay, because it's difficult talking about these issues. I'm just wondering, is there anything else you want to touch on in terms of mental health services? Craig asked about access for men, but you're saying at sort of the base rate is doesn't matter who you are. Do you want to say a bit more about that in terms of, is it a postcode lottery? What are the waiting lists like, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it is a postcode lottery. I think that there isn't that sort of standard of care that you can expect with mental health, wherever you are, whatever your condition. And I think that when we do have such high demand, or, demand sounds a bit funny, really, such high need and people deserving of care and such little resource to meet that, then what happens is that there's a funnel, isn't there? And there has to be a way of somehow getting the resources to the people who need it most. I hate this phrase, the people who need it most, because need is kind of need. If somebody needs something, they need it, and they might need less, but they still need it. So it's kind of like we do need to be able to meet everybody's needs as much as possible, and to include as many people as possible and be flexible enough to respond to them while still having some kind of structure, because that's a bit of a tension in itself. But when there's such little resource, then of course the threshold gets higher and higher and higher. So anybody who doesn't meet that threshold of somebody who's, in my experience with an eating disorder, you have to be extremely at medically risk to get seen anytime soon. Unfortunately, in some places, I'm not discouraging people from asking at all. I can talk more about that, but I think it means that all those people who don't get that are sent a message, either, it's not overtly, but it's covertly a message that you're not deserving of the treatment, because if you needed it, you would have it, because need is a need. And so I think that a lot of damage is done there, where people can start to think that they're not worthy, which we know really feeds into some of the core issues around many mental health problems, and can make their condition worse. It can invalidate your experience as real, because I felt that for sure, struggling with severe mental health problems and being told you're not unwell enough for our service made me think, so am I imagining it, kind of thing? Can I trust my own feelings? Yeah. And that fed into a whole load of other problems around emotion regulation. And so this is not like a harm-free thing. It's not that you see the people, people are getting seen and they get helped and everybody else remains neutral. They often will get worse. And we have to be really honest about that, because if we're designing a system that can only see 10%, say, in eating disorders, or I'm not sure exactly the percentage, but it's not high, then we're also having to agree that the 90% we're agreeing to tolerate their level of suffering and the fact that they might get worse. And I don't think that we should. And I think that it sort of is this kind of has a bit of harm built in, I think, and it doesn't need to be like that. So my hope is that when people do go and ask for help and they get a response that isn't quite what they want or what they think that they need, is that isn't internalized as this is my problem, because we do expect the experts to know and they should provide but it's more of a systemic problem. It's just unfortunate that people's lives are caught up in this and held back by this, but it's not somebody's fault, because everybody's life is worth tending to, whether it's medically or not, or or mild. So I think that resource is the big sort of elephant in the room. And just the last thing I'd say on that is that in mental health, I think we've been the Cinderella service, and I think eating disorders are the Cinderella service of the Cinderella service. My experience, and in terms of research spend, MQ's done great work on that, and highlighting how little is spent, particularly on things like eating disorders. And we're kind of grateful for anything that we get, but I don't think we're very ambitious sometimes. I think we're sort of like fiddling around with a fraction of the resources that we need, thinking, oh, what new research can we do to work out how to spend this fractional resource a little bit better and to get a tiny bit more out of this meager amount that we have. We're like playing around with crumbs, and we need a big loaf of bread. And I think that you can have as much innovation as you like and as many, great little pilot pathways and things as you like, but it's still sort of shuffling around inadequate resources. And I think that is like the big sort of elephant in the room. It's that sort of unsexy thing to say, is that we need more money. People say that, but I think that we still have to be saying that. I do think that's important.
Yeah. And I think that the point you made earlier, James, about the services need to be validating of your experiences. And I think when they don't, then that's problematic. And I think that's not just eating disorders. I think that's across the spectrum of, because the person who knows, who's the expert in their experiences is the person. So making sure we do, and we can and should be doing better, and obviously driving services grounded in compassion and is so important.
I can say one thing on that from my experience is that when I've been and asked for help, like for example, I went to eating services again and I was assessed in December last year, and they said to me after the assessment and everything, it's a good good alliance, which is surprising considering I've got a difficult history with some of these services. And they said, we can't offer you what we think you need. And that's because we can't offer it. And we're not set up for it. And that's not a you thing. I didn't take that personally. I thought, well, that's the system. And that actually really, really helped. Even though I didn't get anything out of that, it was really helpful to hear, actually, we don't have enough money to do that, or we don't provide this particular thing. And I think that was validating. And I think people can be, professionals and services can be more honest in that way and say, we just don't have enough resources to see you. And it's not that you're not important, that you have to wait 6 months. That's on us. I think that can really help, that honesty. It's a compassionate thing to do, I suppose. It's just admitting a little bit of fault, I guess, which I suppose is not always the culture of some services.
No, I agree. I think that's being upfront and saying this is reality. And as you say, you're accepting that it's nothing to do with you, the person needing the support or looking for the support.
So, James, what is your image of the future of mental health research?
I have like a grand plan. So I'll give you the edited highlights. I'll give you some highlights. I think that we need to have this sort of cultural openness to the new, and to, like we've talked about, diverse voices and diverse experiences, and sort of letting go of thinking that we know it all already, and thinking that, we have this book. I like to think of it as a book about, this is what we know about mental health. I don't have my book with me, but I sometimes use it as an example. And we've kind of done the first couple of pages, but we actually don't know it all. And if you drill down into that, research doesn't include huge swathes of people who experience things that are emerging, even as we sort of speak, the sort of prevalence of different things are changing. And we need to be able to sort of be flexible to accommodate changes in a rapidly changing world, to write the rest of this book and to keep finishing off this topic that will never be finished, because the world will keep changing, the social world, the environment and everything, but to continue sort of writing and creating that knowledge that we have about mental health, whether that's illness, whether that's actual health, which is something that I think should be a priority. What is it to be well? That's going to vary for different people and cultures and different stages of life, all kinds of things. And also thinking about, what works in terms of treatment and recovery for who. And so I suppose if we're honest about, we only know, these first few pages, then we've got to create the rest of this knowledge together. Then the second question is, well, who's going to write that and who's going to be involved in the creation of that? And for me, one of my big priorities for mental health research is how can we keep building on these structures of involving and integrating lived experience into research, and how can that be supported? Those structures be supported. People need paying for their time. People need emotional support. People need training. It's not an unskilled kind of job. And then also sort of thinking about, well, what is the role and expertise that comes from lived experience? And I still think this is something that we also don't know completely. Like, I think it's still a work in progress, and I'm always really upfront about that. Any piece of work that I do, I think, we've got to leave a bit of space for evaluating how did this integration of lived experience work, because we're still working out, who do we want to be involved? That matters, but how does it matter? When do we want them involved in the research process? What do we want them to do? Which bits of their experience do we want to know about? Is it them telling their story and then the researcher takes bits of the story and applies it in that way? Or is it the person applying their experience to the piece of work? Yeah. And I still don't think we have it very well defined. We just have this thing of like lived experience. At the worst end, I've seen it and I challenge it. I think it's that tick box thing, or we'll go and get some lived experience. Research teams will have all their projects set up from the beginning without lived experience involvement, perhaps, and then realize, oh, we need to go and get some lived experience, as though it's something you just pull off the shelf and have a little bit of it in your project, sprinkle it on for seasoning, and then sort of carry on. And actually, it's sort of, no. Can it be participatory? Can it be reciprocal, so that people with lived experience are getting something out of it? I once was asked a question by a member of an audience of an event: should people with lived experience be named as co-authors? And I was kind of like, if they wrote it, if they contributed, why not? That's such a weird question. And so, there's some hierarchies and power and that kind of stuff going on there. But I think that those are my sort of priorities. It's sort of having a responsive system to a changing world, and having that sort of range of people involved in creating the knowledge that we have. And maybe there are specific priorities within that. I'm always going to be like eating disorders, neurodiversity, disability, hypermobility, genetics, because these are things that I'm interested in from my own experience. But there are, people will have different and sometimes competing priorities. We've got to do our best to sort of serve them all, I guess. So yeah, those are my main things. But I think in terms of the lived experience stuff, we could do much more sort of grassroots research. I can't just set up a qualitative research thing myself if I'm not attached to a university, for example. But I have the skills and the knowledge to go and do research in the field or whatever, and where does that go? Could there be a specific journal for lived experience? Can there be a process of getting ethics for people who are not attached to an institution, which comes with so many privileges, but, which I didn't have for a very long time? So I think being creative has to be at the heart of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, I think that point about the pragmatics of it, like ethics, is a really important message. And I don't think we have a solution for that yet, except partnering with other organizations. Except I suppose some, like Samaritans as an organization, have their own internal board, but you need the connections with them, I suppose. But no, I think really, really important. So I love your vision, though. I think it's an excellent vision, which if we can meet even some of that, James will be doing really well. Can I maybe return to something more? I think you sort of answered this, but hopefully it'll segue into the next bit, which is, so you've talked a lot earlier about of your own experiences, but thinking now, how do you sort of manage your own well-being? And I think the answer might have 4 letters in it. But am I right in thinking yoga is such an important part of your managing your own well-being as well as I know you do it. Obviously, you're a teacher and stuff, but is that a key bit of how you keep yourself well?
Yeah, I mean, I am not as well as I would like to be, but I definitely sort of am moving in the right direction. And I think that one of the big sort of breakthroughs for me was recognizing the importance of embodied approaches, or just sort of the importance of being in a body, that we are in bodies and that we're not just these minds sort of floating around that need to think better and then we'll feel better. And I think that was a big sort of shift for me that unlocked a lot of progress and unlocked a sense of ease with myself. And I think, the word disease or dis-ease is something that's kind of fundamentally bodily, isn't it? Because it's a feeling, and emotions. That's something I've really struggled with, whether it's kind of not wanting to feel things and using food, or, things feeling out of control emotionally and sort of destroying then my life, I guess, with these waves of emotions, using unhelpful behaviors and things. Feelings are called feelings for a reason. We felt them in our body. So I think, there's such a lot of resource here that isn't always tapped into in traditional treatments, that I think, we need to have a little bit of a rethink. So this is me being sciencey and theoretical about it, but I'll tell you about the yoga as well. But I think that, we have these very top-down approaches that rely on our executive function. So, if you're unwell with an eating disorder, you have to go and sit in a room and talk about cognitive behavioral models of the way that you think, and get really good at sitting and looking at the problem. And hopefully then you change it a little bit, the behavioral stuff is really important. But I think that certainly if you're malnourished, it's quite difficult to access some of those executive functions. Not that people should be denied treatment. Maybe they just need something a little bit different. And I was denied treatment for a long time for that reason, being too underweight. But equally, if you have strong emotions or you don't have that physiological baseline of enough ease, then you can't take in this new information. And I think we overlook that. And I've seen that as a therapist this last year, is that if my client is extremely anxious or distressed, or they're not in their window of tolerance, as I sort of like to think about it, then we're not, it doesn't matter if I'm explaining something psychoeducational to them, or, trying to break down thoughts into a flow chart or something, and then what can come in there, I think, is tapping into the physiology and whether it's the parasympathetic nervous system or whether it's actually activating yourself a little bit. I think those things are so important. We have to think bottom up as well. So for me, it's yoga that I got into that sort of really helped me to come into my body, because I was very detached from it, or I could only experience my body in extremes of completely detached or pain.
So hold on, before you get into the yoga stuff though, just it's always good to get parasympathetic into every podcast if we can. The parasympathetic system rocks. But no, the serious point though is, so did you some revelatory moment when you the whole idea of embodiment and the importance of embodiment came to you, but it's been really important for you?
Yeah, I think it had a slow creep. It sort of was in the background for a while, because I had eventually, after 6.5 years of waiting, I had treatment for eating disorder. By that time, I had dialectical behavior therapy, which is a mindfulness-based therapy. And we were doing these mindfulness exercises in groups where I was like, oh my goodness, I can't tolerate being in my body. And it just feels so uncomfortable. And there's something bodily about this. And that sort of planted a seed. And then for a long time, I wanted to try yoga because I thought mindfulness is really helpful. It was very, very helpful to me. But I kind of needed to be doing something. The mindfulness activities that worked for me were the ones where I was doing a little bit, because it was kind of distracting enough. But I could also then sort of focus. And so I thought yoga would be great because it kind of be like a moving meditation, but I wouldn't let myself go until I was kind of to go by an ex-partner, because I kind of knew that it would be good for me. So I was like resisting it. And so anyway, I went to yoga for the first time, late 20s. And I think that moment of embodiment, that sort of click moment, there was one. Often there aren't these click moments that people love, mental health recovery stories. I did have one that's very cheesy. So when I went to my first yoga class, I felt like I was coming home. And that is really easy, beautiful narrative, would make a good poem. But I think it was not coming home to yoga because I'd never done it before. It was coming home to my body in encountering my embodied experience in a way that wasn't shutting it off completely. You know, you think anorexia, way of doing that, or punishing and feeling it 100%. You know, I really am alive now. It was somewhere in the middle, and I felt like I could tolerate it. And it was, you know, I had to leave in the relaxation when I started because it was just too much. I don't do nothing. Over time, it built up, and then I've taught yoga for quite a long time. These days, I don't really practice much traditional yoga myself. I teach. I do practice movement and exercise, but mostly I think of it all as the same kind of thing, really. Yoga for me means connection, and that's sort of where the word comes from. But I practice more resistance stuff to strengthen and stabilize my joints, because after starting yoga and realizing I could do everything straight away, and it was very, very flexible, I was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a hypermobility genetic condition. So I'll show you, like, I can pull everything out like very far and it doesn't hurt at all. So there isn't so much structure in my joints. So I don't need to practice yoga. I need to practice strength. But for me, it's part of the same thing of this being in my body in a way that is new and having that different experience of being in my body, not just those flipping to extremes, but I can be here in the ebb and the flow. And then I'm actually more attuned to my mental health because I can feel the emotions as they rise and I can respond to it. And it's given me so much more space between sort of, I guess, my reactions to the world around me, and they've toned down a bit. Maybe that's just age as well. There's a bit of a stereotype, but and actually my choice to respond in different ways and actually use the skills, because I knew all of the skills in therapy straight away because I'm an information hoarder. I would read, all about CBT, DBT, all these things. Only takes you so far if you can't actually sort of be that to practice. And the body is the vehicle for all of our experiences, for me. So I think that really unlocked a lot of other things that really helped.
I love that term just there. Was the body is the vehicle of all our experiences. I think that's a really important message, but also that mind-body distinction thing. I mean, we're one being, and I don't think we've put enough focus on understanding really that reciprocal relationship between the two. I think it's so central.
I could go on about that all day. I mean, I think like we talk about the mind-body connect. I won't go on about it all day, just half a minute. We talk about the mind-body connection all the time, and I even don't like that because it's sort of saying if the mind and body are connected, well, the mind is here and the body is, it's the integration, isn't it? But that is a huge priority for me for mental health research in the future, is that I think we overlook the body at high risk, and I think we still do. And I see it a lot in the psychology world, and I sort of worry about it because I think we end up losing a lot of resource and a lot, and it's great that more and more people are interested. And I think that the yoga embodiment mindfulness background really helps me going into training as a psychologist. Much that we don't know, like the whole hypermobility, the genetic thing, how that relates to the digestive system in eating disorders and neurodiversity. There's lots of really interesting studies, some of them linked to MQ, that are looking into this, and it shows you like, oh, there is so much we don't know about how these things integrate.
Can anyone get into yoga?
Yes, that's an easy question.
Yeah.
I think people have an idea of what yoga is. I get so many people saying to me, I would love to do yoga, always with a sense of guilt, because they should be doing it, but I'm just not flexible. I'm kind of like, if you try yoga, actually, most people are surprised by the strength, not by the flexibility. And it's all adaptable. People have an idea that it's have to have your hands on the floor, straight legs, you have to do all this kind of stuff. It's about making it work for you. And I think that's the ethos of my teaching. I know it's not for everybody, but it offers a huge range of practices that if you find the fit for you, it can hopefully be health giving or support your health.
Craig, have you done yoga?
No, I've tried little bits. I would say I'm double jointed, but the most I could do is put my leg behind my head.
Yeah,
but it's been
not bad. That's quite advanced.
It's been many years, and I would do that weirdly in the middle of a classroom.
I was just about to whip my leg behind my head, but I think it would just be inappropriate.
Here, so just the last, time has beaten us almost. So the last two questions are a bit different from we've been talking really about mental health and your experiences, your aspirations, and so on. So maybe two sort of quick fire ones to end, James, if that's okay. And they're a wee bit unfair on one level, but here goes. So first one is thinking back to your 18-year-old self. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's so difficult. I think I was very unwell when I was 18, and I think that I was at a point, I was supposed to go to Cambridge and couldn't go because I was so unwell with anorexia, and I think I felt like I'd kind of lost everything. And I would tell that person who thought that everything was lost that, yes, of course, it's really difficult and you're starting from what you think of as nothing, but actually you still have a lot of things within you that, with the right context and the right support, can create so much stuff that you can't even imagine in that moment. And that sort of life might not be the things that you thought you were going to do, but actually you will do things that you will miss out if it had been straightforward and you'd just gone school, university, whatever. Actually, that might have been great. You wouldn't have suffered, but there might be other things that I've done now that I really value that I would miss. And so I suppose that reminder that, so long as you're alive and you have enough support, you can create something good, I think.
No, I think it's great advice. But then, so some years ago, you're early 30s now, I think, are you?
Yeah.
So it's interesting then that you're now at Cambridge, or back in Cambridge. I don't know if you've lived in Cambridge in the whole period of time. That's a nice sort of completeness to it.
Yeah, it was a bit of a full circle thing. Like I did my master's here, and because I couldn't go, it was kind of the big thing that was taken away from me. And I was doing music, and I gave up doing music, and I came here to do psychology. And I did eventually get a degree, very long story of dropping out of many things, with the Open University, who I'm a lecturer with them now. That's one of my other jobs that I forgot. But I thought my degree wasn't a real degree, because it was with the Open University and it wasn't Cambridge, and it wasn't this thing. There was this unfinished business with Cambridge. So I applied to come here to do another undergrad degree, and found it a bit tedious because I'd already got a degree and it was like basic psychology first year. And I did the first year, and then I was like, oh, this is so difficult. I'm not enjoying it. And they said to me, oh, you can do a master's because you have a degree. And that didn't occur to me at all, because I thought it was second class kind of degree. Whereas now, having seen Cambridge from the inside, I'm like, the Open University has amazing materials, maybe slightly better than Cambridge. So
Open University is incredible. It's an incredible university.
I think maybe that's what I would also tell myself as an 18-year-old, the thing that you think is all that and is amazing, like one day you'll have experienced it. And actually maybe it wasn't quite what you thought it was going to be. And other things that you've done are really valuable. And don't write those things off. You can still have a good, meaningful life when you're unwell as well. I haven't recovered, and I still have so many things that I love in my life. It's not that there's this sort of, exclusive thing, that it's either or.
Mm-hmm. Not great. And then the last one, and then we'll let you go, James, is, so if you could have a coffee with anybody, living or dead, who would be your dream number one?
This is the worst kind of question.
Yeah. Well, I've made it a coffee rather than dinner, so it made it slightly easier, maybe.
You don't have to spend as much time.
So I can have two.
Okay, you can have two. This isn't Desert Island Discs, so you can have two.
So I've got here, if it was just that we could only communicate through song, I would have Nina Simone.
Great. Yeah.
It's just my friend drew this out of all different words of her song.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So it's like
That's fantastic.
That's by Gary Dad. That's a big sort of promo for him. And I haven't even taken it out of the cellophane yet. But
that's fabulous.
Range like the joyful songs and then the really sort of powerful songs and like a whole range of emotions. And then if it's a living person and we could talk, I would choose Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I don't know if you know her.
Yeah.
Background on my phone. That's how much of a fan I am. And she wrote Fleabag, and I'm thinking more and more people now.
She'd be a great guest, actually. Yeah.
I would choose
get coffee. Well, I would go for more than coffee with Phoebe, though. Drinks. Yeah.
But I really admire her because I kind of want to be her in terms of her creativity, because that's something that's, alongside yoga and stuff, creativity. And I've gone back to music now, and I play music regularly, which I didn't for a long time when I was unwell. Like, that is so important to me. And I see that as part of the mental health research agenda in terms of, it is a creative endeavor. We are creating knowledge there are many ways to find that. Sometimes it's a creative artistic method. Other times it's your randomized control trial. Mm-hmm. I see a value for all of them. And we shouldn't, overemphasize some kinds of ways of knowing over others. But I think that some things are sort of only communicated through art and songs and wonderful stories. And I'm all about stories, because it's lived experience. So Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Nina Simone, I think would make a great party.
Two great suggestions. So no, that's a great way to end, James. On behalf of Craig and I and MQ, thanks so much for all the work you do as an ambassador for MQ, but also for sharing your story today on our podcast. Thanks a million. Goodbye. Take care.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.